like the conversation earlier today, the conversation about what does it mean for EU ports in this moment, especially with all the different intersections we have already heard today, with the conversations in the room and all the different types of partners that are here when we say blue economy. So as part of the introduction, and I'll start with you, Isabella, the kind of describing your role and your work. And unfortunately, I'm picking on you first. We can start the other way too if you want. So, but describing your role and one key element that for you says, here's how EU port advancement, especially in the present context, is something that you're working on and is part of your organization's role.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. So yes, I'm replacing Danik, but we are from the European Seaports Organization, so we represent the port managing bodies here in Brussels of all the European ports. And we are, if all goes well, 2 weeks away from the launch of the European Port Strategy, which will be an embracing strategy covering many fields. And for us, it's good to have a strategy, but every port has a strategy. So, and what I wanted to say is that we are going like through in the world, Europe, to this, we are navigating through a storm, climate, geo-economic and geopolitical, and ports are in the middle of that. And they are having to navigate for themselves, to be resilient, to decarbonize themselves, but they can also help and contribute to decarbonizing, to making society and economy more resilient and so on. And this means new functions for the port. So traditionally a port is moving goods and persons, but now they are moving energy as well, moving military, moving data even. So this means a lot of functions that come on top of the traditional functions. And we say blue economy, but blue economy is also a very vast concept covering a lot of areas, and which means that the land of a port in many ways is not expanding. So you have to share space between different parties, different stakeholders. You have to talk with different stakeholders, not at least actually and unfortunately the military people, which is a new dimension again. So it's quite challenging. And what we see as well is that all these new roles are roles where there is a big public interest factor, meaning that you are having to play a role with not always an equal return on investment, also for the investments that you are making. And in the meantime, you have to run your business. So that is a bit what we're standing for. So what we think that in this port strategy, as I said, we like as ports because all ports are different. And that I think it's a crucial message. It's very difficult to put them in one frame, let's say, because every port has its value, but all ports are doing different things. Some do 8 different things. Some are just a lifeline between the island and the mainland. So it all depends a bit. But what is needed is first, I think, stability, because we are in a changing world. You have to adapt, but what can be stable should be stable. Also, the investors that are there and that want to invest, we should try to keep them and have them kept and not have additional rules or whatever on why and how can their contracts be renewed, etc. This diversity important, support is important, and therefore we really look forward to the European budget and the Connecting Europe facility, because if we want to decarbonize, if we want to serve these different sectors of the blue economy, we will need infrastructure, we will need investments. We did a study 2 years ago, and the result was that on port investments, that the port investments that the ports needed was 80 billion in the next 10 years. And this was without all the military investments, so which will make the bill even bigger. So I think these are the important things: space, permitting, and room for maneuver, flexibility, because it's important not to impose ports all to do the same things, because then we will lose a lot of money, certainly looking at all these public interest roles. But let every port be competitive, have a competitive basis to speed up on decarbonization, on resilience.
Yeah, my favorite statement about ports is if you've seen one port, you've seen one port, and that's for sure as we go globally and work with partners who are working with ports. So, Tordi, over to you.
Yes, Stuart, thank you. Happy to be here. I'm Turi Fiorito, Director of the European Federation of Inland Ports. So we represent port authorities located on Europe's inland waterways. I always like to say that our membership goes from Porto to Kiev and everything in between, to give you an idea of where we are located. To focus in on a specific key concept, which is important for the development and the advancement of ports, is this topic of resilience. Everything we see that at European level we have set as joint targets comes back to this, and ports are ideally located to support this. If we look over the last 6 years now, first with COVID, then with the war in Ukraine, ports every time have stepped up to be alternatives to pre-crisis solutions. So for instance, in Ukraine, a lot of Danube inland ports supported the redirection of grain from Ukraine. It was a small addition, but it was an important example of what we can do. And same is for climate change adaptation, energy transition, and military mobility. All of this is encompassed by resilience. So any investment we do in the future contributes to European resilience to any type of threat.
That's great. And we mentioned it a little bit earlier, and I think you'll hear this a lot, that sense of resilience to shocks and stresses. There's different ways of looking at it, and certainly in inland ports, you see that in other continents as well, where the inland is clearly just as important as some of the coastal ports. So I'm really glad you're part of this. And over to you.
Thanks. So I'm Lucy Gilliam. I'm representing a small NGO from Rotterdam called One Planet Port. And we set up specifically to focus on the port of Rotterdam, partly because it's Europe's largest port and it has pretty much every port industry contained within it. So it's sort of a representative of all ports somehow. And there's a lot of innovation happening there, but it's also, you know, it's often referred to as the backbone of the economy, but it's also a hotspot of pollution, and not just climate pollution. So the port has its direct emissions in terms of climate, but it also facilitates throughput emissions of 1/5 of Europe's emissions. That's because it's one of the biggest oil refining ports. But it's not only that, it's also a hotspot of air pollution, and up to about 50% of the air pollution is actually directly coming from maritime and all maritime related activities, because you not only have ships coming, but you also have the onward freight. Ports are also hotspots of novel entities, and what I mean by that is sort of chemical pollution. You may have heard in the news about the problem of forever chemicals that's related to the chemical production there. And also nitrogen pollution, again, another hot political potato in the Netherlands. And biodiversity. So this makes it a very interesting ecosystem. And what we're trying to do at One Planet Port is make sure that in the transition that we're taking a planetary boundaries approach, that we haven't just got carbon myopia, that we're addressing all of the planetary boundaries, because one thing that's clear, we're already in serious overshoot when it comes to our environment. We've transgressed 7 of the planetary boundaries, and that means that we need to have transition plans that are holistic and win-win-win across these planetary boundaries. So that means not just tackling climate, but looking at finding solutions that address biodiversity, that address water quality, that tackle the nutrient crisis. And so, you know, what are the things that we're advocating for? You know, firstly, zero pollution infrastructure, things like shore power for all vessels, banning things like scrubber discharges, reception facilities for all waste streams, electrified port operations are just some of the things that can help us get there. Secondly, a just transition with community power. Part of the work that we're doing in this space is air pollution monitoring, so looking at ultrafine particles, which is a new issue where the European directives require there to be new data on ultrafine particles and also measures to address this source of very dangerous air pollution. And giving people a voice in the transition, of course, so that communities have decision-making power of what infrastructure ends up on their doorstep. And finally, one of the things that we're working very hard on is comprehensive fuel sustainability criteria. So making sure that in the fuels and the energy transition, we're not trying to solve the climate problem by creating another problem, and particularly looking at some of the safety and the wider environmental impacts of some of the fuel choices for maritime.
Thanks, Darlene. Roberto.
Hello. Yes. So good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for the invitation. So my name is Roberto Alberti, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer and Chief Corporate Officer of Costa Cruises. Costa Cruises is a European leading company, headquartered in Genoa with a global operation, but operation mainly focused on Europe, Mediterranean, North Europe, and Canary Island. And my role, one of the driver of my role is the engagement with the European authorities and the European ports, because we want to offer extraordinary experience to our guests while safeguarding the integrity of the sea we sail and the places we visit. Costa has been pioneering in sustainability. Together with AIDA, we have been the first introducing LNG on the cruise industry back to 2018. And we used to work with communities to also in the social field. I mean, we've been the first one also to partnering with Banco Alimentare to provide food in excess to the people needs in the local communities. And one of the mission that our company, together with the cruise industry, has is to work closely with the community to strengthen the social acceptance of cruise business and make clear all the benefits that our business is bringing to communities that sometimes are, undermined by instrumental and position. But as a matter of fact, the cruise industry brought to Europe over 55 billion euro economic value every year, 400,000 jobs, and is a volano for the shore tourism, because 66% of cruise passengers go back to the port on their own, or let's say to better experience the places that they visited with the ships. So it's really a healthy, machine for the economy, for the social impact, and for the tourism in general. And the challenge that the industry has is the decarbonization. But there is a clear roadmap that is bringing every year real improvement, but to accelerate on that and to make sure that, we can really work as a system, healthy system, we need really to strengthen the collaboration with all the ports and also all the stakeholders that have different views, but that by listening, learning with an open approach can help also us in addressing the main priorities for our continent.
That's great. And you touched on something that almost everybody else did, which was the sense of balance between stakeholders in the local, cultural, social, and sort of the economic. And of course, one of the levers we talked about in planning was the sense of competitiveness. And I think one of the things that I could kind of drill down on just a tiny bit is when you think of the local stakeholders and engaging the local stakeholders, the workforce piece is really an important piece of that kind of competitiveness. How do you see workforce development training, especially when you're starting to work in Rotterdam, for instance, and you're sort of looking at the adverse effects plus all the amazing industries that are there at the same time? Same thing can be said with the cruise line. So how do you engage on the workforce development training and sort of making an EU port competitive with that lens? So I'll start here again.
Yes, maybe just to explain a bit, because port authorities in Europe are, most of the ports are landlord ports. So they are, in fact, the terminals, etc., are being manned by port workers that are working with the terminals. So we the port authorities are not the employers of these people, you know, the manforce. Of course, there are a lot of jobs, but by bringing a lot of activities together in the port, it's clear that the port is really a center also of an important economic player for the city, because we may not forget that in fact the big cities in Europe have been developed where there is a port. So, and now it's a bit, over the years, the ports have then been a bit pushed away out of the cities because bigger installations, etc. And my hope is always that with the greening, with the decarbonization, etc., that is coexistent, that you can bring them a bit back to the city. What is interesting, there are two things, I think, with what we discussed, decarbonization, whatever, energy transition. Two things that are interesting is that the profiles in the port are changing a lot. So it's not anymore the big bloke that is needed in the port only. No, it's all very sophisticated profiles. We need the communication people that you have in the city. We need all the things that you have in the city. And that is one thing I think that is important. And one thing where also the Port Authority can be stimulated, can explain the port, have the contacts with the schools, etc. The second thing, interesting thing, is that the big ports in Europe will remain the big logistic hubs, etc. But you get also through the energy transition, through, for instance, offshore wind energy, you get some new, what I would call maritime capitals, maybe in regions that are a bit not in the center of Europe, not very near consumption areas, but you can get there very interesting ports where you will be able to attract again new profiles, engineers, etc., and build a city. I think Ashbeck is, for instance, an interesting example where the city has been growing and following really very recently the expansion of the port, and I mean the new business with the offshore wind in the port. So I think these are developments, and maybe a bit positive developments, sometimes in a negative context, or you know, where they say the port is polluting, etc. But the port is also part of the solution, and that I think we should also put in the forefront.
Yeah, and you saw from the previous discussion, or the previous presentation, building new types of infrastructure that are part of new industry that also bring workers of varying types, also change the port and its layout, offering space to do things like the underwater turbines or whatever the manufacturing might be. So other thoughts on those stakeholders and the training and how we're engaging everyone?
To add what because Isabel gives a very good overview of this challenge with the workforce, I think there's two other things that port authorities do that help with this. One, we of course host a lot of educational specialized institutes, so that's one. The second one is we are more and more changing our business activities and the type of clients that we host. So instead of just being a pure logistical hub, you also see new businesses being attracted. Here in the Port of Brussels, for instance, more and more focus on local mobility and building materials collecting. So these are new things that normally didn't necessarily happen. And giving new opportunities to people coming into the labor force with specific technical expertise also attracts them. Because if you're just doing the old things you were always doing, then you will get the same people with the same type of training, which are no longer those that we need. So we continue to offer this place of come to us, be innovative, and use your training in the best way, because at this point everybody is competing for well-trained employees in various fields, because it's not just imports, it's everywhere where we are dealing with these shortages.
Yeah, and I mean, even handling waste can be turned into new industries, and therefore, as we heard earlier, right, if that cycle's working properly, you have a whole sort of set of verticals that come from just the waste, right? And that can be something that has a kind of co-benefit to it. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that, and it's been said before. I think that something that's really important is, yeah, there are so many different sorts of jobs in the ports today, and I think to couple with just like, you know, going into other sectors and saying, well, this is what your sector does in the port and what you could do for the port ecosystem, is also having an awareness of, why are we doing things? Like, what is the change and the transition? So, you know, coupling the diversification of your kind of just transition and your skills programs to also, like, what is the mission that we're on? To have more buy-in and to perhaps open up, you know, the minds of, why do we need this like clean industrial cluster, or why do we need this space for these circular economy activities? And also maybe to just have more people engaging of, okay, so what are we going to do with our ports? What does the future look like? Because depending on your outlook on the environment or your scenarios for your economy, you've got a very different looking port. So there's been some really interesting work that's been done in the Netherlands by PBL, which is, I think it's the Planning Bureau. And whether you're looking at a sufficiency economy or a green growth economy, you've got very different spatial planning. And I think that, yeah, somehow we need to sort of couple that all together so that we're training for the workforces of tomorrow, and perhaps also providing an incentive of, why would you want to do this? This is like cutting edge. This is about the future. You know, you can have a job where you're really meaningful to society if it's coupled with meeting those environmental and social objectives. So, you know, even in a port like Rotterdam, which has, I think, pretty good skills training programs, great relationships with the nautical colleges. They train people from all over the world. There is still a huge number of vacancies. Why is that? Even though there's, you know, all these skill knowledge centers. And maybe it's because, you know, the next generation needs to be mission aligned. So I think that needs to be incorporated into it. What is the mission we're on? What is the port of the future? And who are the people we need to deliver it?
Yeah, and one of the things that Barcelona has done, if you're not familiar, the Blue Tech port, and now a massive expansion to that into these old warehouses, which once it's done is a kind of blue economy, blue tech hub that is completely in addition to sort of, and we've gone into the offices there as World Ocean Council, but bringing innovators who then are a completely different set of skill sets. They're supporting the port, or maybe companies within them as well. So that holistic environment really starts to change when you sort of kind of get out of the box a little bit.
Yeah, there's some great examples of that actually happening in Rotterdam as well, like the new Sub-Zero labs that are connected to Platform Zero, which is all about innovative climate tech for the maritime space. Yeah. And they have, whole areas of the harbour now dedicated to, you know, circular port-related activities.
Thank you. So let me just give an overview about the role of the European port. The European ports are strategic assets for trade, industrial competitiveness, energy security, defense, and also tourism. And it's not just a matter of tariff, but it's more, let's say today, competitiveness is systemic. And looking at the cruise tourism, there are three pillars to ensure competitiveness to European ports. First one is infrastructure, digitalization, and passenger experience. Cruise line deploy ships where, terminal are efficient, innovative, operations are reliable, and the connections with airport, rail, and cities are seamless. And today, let's say, the competitiveness is driven by reduced turnaround times while improving quality, accessibility, and guest experience. Second pillar is sustainability. And sustainability doesn't mean loss of competitiveness. And we know, all the discussion underway with EU Fuel Maritime, with the ETS, which is a local regulation and doesn't create harmonized rules among the operators. But this is something, I hope that the European Commission will address in the short term, not only work on the strategy, which is okay, but working on what can be done to make sure that, let's say, sustainability can become a competitive advantage. And not only as it is today, as a distortion of the competition in favor of non-European ports. And third is the integration with communities, because as I was saying before, let's say competitive ports are the ones that manage smartly the flows, that let's say communicate the value of the cruise business and spread across the territory the economic value, also not only let's say in the area, so bringing value to the less visited places, but also in low season. So the value of cruise business is to be able to let's say bring tourists also in low season. Let's think about Mediterranean, where now also, in the winter period, you have ships calling all Mediterranean port, but also North Europe. And then, let's say, working on the, together with the local stakeholders through smart digital tools or through, let's say, the data sharing, because the cruise business has their operation planned in advance, 2 years, usually 2 years in advance, and knowing that you can, working together, redirect the flows where the value is needed. So in conclusion, let's say the competitiveness of the European port needs, let's say, the shift of the sustainability of the digitalization from a burden to a competitive advantage. And for doing that is important. The system need large investment, harmonized rules, and collaboration among the different stakeholders.
So you started to touch on it in the end there. One of the other areas that we talked about being an important lever, and this is a very specific stakeholder, and that's the local or regional or perhaps national government. And in particular, for most parts, it's their paired city, right, or a region. And so one of the ways that competitiveness has increased is that relationship along a whole bunch of verticals gets better. How do we do that for grid, for fuel? Because as has been said already, you can't change a port without some of the outlying area. And you already touched on workforce, you touched on the companies that might be there. That's obviously a real interest for us. But I think one other key one is that if you have a city or a region or even a national or province or state government, how do you improve that so that the port can do more and the city's better connected? And there are great examples already happening like this, but how do we do that? And any one of you can pick this one up. We don't have to go in any kind of order, but how do you engage the city or the state or the province or how do you make that happen? Because the port needs that.
If I'll go first, I think where it comes down to is, as a port authority, you understand that your role is to manage and take care of the port on behalf of the city and the government and the citizens. It's not, you're not the port owner, so to speak. You're doing it for the society. I know that sounds a bit high-minded, but that's how it works, and that's how it also works in daily activities. There is always necessary buy-in, which Lucy was mentioning earlier as well, from the city and the citizens. That's necessary. One of my favorite examples, I mean, this is Switzerland, so it doesn't work everywhere, I understand, but where Port of Basel wanted to build a new terminal, so they did a referendum. And the people from the port went house to house and essentially politically campaigned for it to get the buy-in. And they won the vote in this case. And that same type of discussion happens everywhere. And we as ports take on board questions and requests on biodiversity, on what are the decarbonization targets that we are setting for ourselves, or other emissions and issues. And that conversation is how you get to a strategy that the society or the government layers have bought in on. But we have to be honest. If we set the objectives together, then we also have to follow through with them. If then 4 years later you come back and you say, well, we kind of want to put something else over there now, that makes it very difficult to develop and keep a port competitive. So we have to have that discussion in that way together.
I thought you were going to say trust.
I think that's a good word, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'll come in and talk a little bit about trust then, because I think that's really important, and having a good outreach with all the stakeholders. There's going to be kind of a big debate about expansion of Rotterdam and about a third Maasvlakte, or, where do we put new energy infrastructure? But this is where trust comes in. We had expansion of Maasvlakte 1 and 2, where there was supposed to be nature compensation, like the whole kind of port ecosystem of Rotterdam used to be an incredible, nature reserve, an incredible, tidal area where, there's a tiny triangle left of it now, and now there's all this talk about, expanding further into the sea and even destroying entire villages to make way for new energy infrastructure in the kind of south of the port ecosystem. So there is a little bit like, well, you didn't compensate nature or keep to your promises last time, so how are we going to believe what you're going to do this time? So I think it's really, really important. Nature isn't just, biodiversity isn't something that's just sort of like take it or leave it, nice to have. It's really fundamental to having clean air, clean water, our ecosystem function. So, and by protecting biodiversity, we help meet some of our other objectives. So I think it comes back to the idea of having a vision and being real about where we need to get to. What is the economy of the future, and what are the activities that we're going to prioritize? And so when you're making decisions about new infrastructure, really thinking, okay, it's not just about energy, it's also about material flows, obviously. Ports carry material things. Is this really going to grow? Because growth in materials comes with it growth in impact. There's no way to get away from that. So that means if we're trying to tackle biodiversity and climate, we've got to tackle our material footprint. If we're tackling our material footprint, we're going to change throughput in our ports, and we're going to change what's shipped. So are we going to turn Maasvlakte 3 into more and more container ports? when we already have 6 generations of clothes and we're already creating so much waste and shipping our waste all over the world because we can't deal with it locally? Or are we going to actually prioritize activities that create meaningful jobs and create a meaningful, sufficient economy in the future? Because those are the kind of decisions that we have to make now. And it's not just nice to have, it's really fundamental to our economy. And I think, you know, I worry perhaps a little bit about this idea of made in Europe targets that's perhaps coming in the EU port strategy. But maybe we should really think about that of, what can we do that's totally common sense to reduce supply chain complexity and to meet like our needs in terms of like trade and food and circular economic activities? And how is that going to change the port and make sure we invest in that rather than continuing to invest in a hyper growth economy that's undermining all of our environmental objectives?
And I think, and as well, we'll go to you next, because I think, you know, part of this is then what is the government role in that, and what's the connection to the city and the local consumer versus passing through or going somewhere else. So Isabel, you wanted to jump in too.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I understand, and I think like your NGO, it's very important to have this dialogue in every port, and I think ports, this port-city relationship, the you know, ports, I always say ports, one leg is in the city, in the local community, and one leg is in a global world, and it's a bit this conflict that you always have, but it's not a conflict. I think this local aspect is very important, but at the same time, you will need to see what is happening. Why is the port expanding? Why is there new infrastructure? And I think if I talk to many of our members, it's not because we want to import more clothes from China or whatever. It's because you have to serve a lot more public interest roles, being the energy transition, being the military. I mean, this is coming with material. This is because if there is something fossil energy, we have to get rid of that. But if there is something easy to handle, it's fossil energy. All the renewable energies need more space, need more. You have to store. You would need the electrolyzer, etc., etc. So it's a bit more complicated, but it's for the good for society and the economy. So, and if it's not happening in the port, then it's somewhere outside the port. But I also, when I started years ago working in this function, there was one of the port CEOs saying there is a paradox. In fact, a port is there to avoid transport because you put a lot of things together, you cluster them, and like that you avoid unnecessary transport, unnecessary emission, unnecessary nuisance, and so on. So I think but of course it's a very difficult balance. You have to, but I think there is so much legislation in place to help finding the right balance. The other thing is if we go in the extreme of balancing all the interests and so on, that we are delaying very good projects. And then we will not get to our net zero Europe. We will not get to our zero pollution Europe. Because this is, I mean, it's conflicting goals sometimes. And I think we need to find the right way. We need to dialogue, but we also need to progress. And that I think it's on the top of the agenda, this port-city relation, this sustainability. We make every year our environmental report already since years. In Espoo, I mean, you see that sustainability, it's really a top concern of most of the ports, if not all. And even the small ones, north, south, east, west, I think it's for everyone a concern.
So let's say the engagement at all level of government is key to secure the competitiveness of our ports, and otherwise the risk is that you don't address in a omnicomprehensive way all the challenges and the opportunities that you have. And therefore, I mean, from my point of view, let's say the key element and the key challenge that the European port strategy should address is how to support the conversion of the port in central hub for green energy. I know we all say similar things, but at a certain point we have to make sure that what we say, it happens. And so, I mean, if you look at the shore power, we have in Europe only around 20 ports equipped with shore power. And 60% on the other side, 60% of the cruise industry has shore power available on the ships. And on that, we know that we have to accelerate with the infrastructure, but also having clear that the energy cost that will be provided to the ship has to be sustainable, economically sustainable. Otherwise, the risk is that you create infrastructure, but then ships are maybe, let's say, incentivized to move their assets to other ports where the cost of the energy is lower. And as well as, let's say, the alternative fuels, biofuels, e-fuels, where the availability is very low now, and we should invest in making sure that production and storage and distribution of alternative fuel in our port will be available.
Yeah, and so that we don't run out of time, I see some folks in the audience nodding and perhaps even shaking their heads. I won't point you out, but anyone have questions so that we finish on time? I want to make sure we get to the audience because there's quite a robust conversation here on stage. Questions for the panelists? Oh, somebody wants to enter the fray. No? Okay. So you're on your own. No, because we do have to finish by 3. One of the things about the city or the government connection, right, is of course the ports can't change the infrastructure on their own, right, and especially if it's not one that's been moved away. And I think back to Isabella's point, like ports were the city. That was our interaction, and then it got more separate, and we also distanced ourselves from the ocean, from the sea to some extent, right? We had boats before had wheels, right? So we had such a tight tie. I think one of the things that gets back to the idea and the main concept here of competitiveness then is if we're solving that, and I remember, Lucy, now you making comments at our Blue Glue event 2 years ago about these kinds of things, and that glue is what the blue glue is what we're trying to reestablish. So to end off the panel, since there weren't questions, what are those things that are going to be the biggest challenges to make the shift, whether it's the grids and connecting the city, whether it's the workforce? What is it that's going to be the most important thing for you as we move towards the new port plans, but also just generally for EU port competitiveness? Think about it a second. I'm going to go. You've been wanting to say something, so if you've got something ready, go ahead, Lucy.
It's a really good question. I think I do think the decisions about like what infrastructure we put where, because Isabel made a good point that the new fuels, they have very different characteristics. They have different safety margins that need to be respected. Some of them can't be put near like population centers. There are potentially safety interactions from different fuels being put together, and they're less energy dense. So we're just not going to be able to store as much energy in situ as we've been accustomed to when we've been storing fossil fuels. So that presents some challenges. And we've also got the issue of we've got existing infrastructure while we need to build new infrastructure. But yeah, so that's the choices of what goes where and getting like projects over the line in terms of investment, and also making sure you have robust permitting processes, but also that they don't take too long. I mean, that is a huge challenge. And then having the energy available if you're having to make fuels on site. I mean, I think that is definitely a huge challenge. Grid connection, you know, we really do need to, that's, I would say, and like a number one priority is improving that and enabling like industrial connections. Because like it's the most efficient thing is perhaps not using that energy in the first place. But if you're going to use the energy, if something's electric rather than having to be created, you know, there's so many losses in making e-fuels. So we've really got to think about that energy hierarchy. I think in a similar way, we think about a waste hierarchy. We need to think of an energy hierarchy and prioritize really being very clever about how we use energy and plan for it. And that means we have to have good plans and visions that are worked out with all stakeholders,
Right.
with
Energy,
the government as well.
Energy. Great.
Yeah.
Turi, your idea.
To follow up on that, I think, well, like we've been talking about, this is the biggest transformation, I think, for ports. It's currently ongoing that we have seen since, say, the end of the 19th century, because this change and the new responsibilities that are coming with it. What it means is that we also need to get the buy-in from certain industries to actually do these things. Because again, we represent port authorities. We give the land, we enable organizations, but they have to come and do it. And they will only do it if there is a certain level of predictability that they know that they can develop for the coming years. And therefore, we need a long-term plan that we've made together. Which targets do we want? And then we have to go and implement it. This means that the government can also not, because there's a bit of a headwind at some point, immediately change its mind and sort of torpedo specific investments that are already being done, because then the next person who comes with its, say, circular economy business will be like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to invest here because they changed their mind. So predictability and a strong plan will get us there as long as we make it with the different stakeholders, as you say.
That's great. So we've heard strategy, predictability, and the prioritization on the fuels. Isabel, your...
Yes, I think there is a sense of urgency and everything what is ahead, and maybe a sense you want to move fast, but there is a lot of uncertainty, and ports are heavy assets, so they need the long-term planning, but the world is changing every news edition, I think, when we hear something new. So, and with really shocks for ports, for certain ports, because with every sanction, with everything, there is one that peaks, one that goes down, etc. So that is very complex, and we have to move fast, not in a challenging world, but in a very complex regulatory environment. So I think we really need to question, I mean, there is a port strategy coming, and we hope that this strategy is creating like a big understanding of the complexity of ports, the diversity of ports, the challenges that ports have, but that they are not making a script of how every port should evolve. We should also not overestimate the role of a port, the port authority. What can the port authority do? The port authority cannot green the whole port. The port authority cannot green shipping. It's shipping who has to green shipping. I mean, we can just create the environment, see that the investors come, like Turi is saying, but port authorities are not tank stations. I mean, we see that shipping lines are getting LNG from another port, you know, with a bunker ship instead of the bunker ship or the facility that is in the port. So why do you then need to have, by definition? No, it's the demand that will create the supply. So I think this is, and we are a bit in an uncertain, a lot of technological uncertainty, what will be the winning fuel. You also have so many different ship segments. I think cruise, for instance, is very particular in the sense, I think certain fuels will not work for you. I mean, for other segments it will work. Then ports are different, the geography is different. So I think we need to all that and maybe accept that there is not one solution, and let the market play as well. But support the market, support the player, and that is, I think, competitiveness as well.
I'm going to say urgency and complication at the same time.
No solution.
So, Roberto, you get the last word
Yeah.
before we go to our break.
So I have, let's say, a great supporter of the market to create competitive conditions. But we have also to be aware that, let's say, with the recent steps, let's say, to support decarbonization, as I was saying before, some distortion on competition have been brought. Having said that, we have to turn, let's say, the burden into an opportunity, into a strength. And how can we do that? I mean, for instance, harmonized rules within Europe. Our company in some port is not able to test the biofuels because it's not allowed to, in the port to run, let's say, biofuel, while in other ports this is possible. LNG infrastructure, Barcelona is, was advanced in this respect. Other ports were not. ETS, there are a lot of revenues coming from ETS and funded by the shipping industry. Why there is no transparency and clear direction on how to reinvest this revenue into the sector? I mean, there is the Innovation Fund, but in the last, let's say, bidding, out of 70 projects, only 2 were for maritime sector. So
that's a great statistic.
So these are all elements we should think all together, really to make sure that we don't lose, the opportunity of being really a strong supporter of our maritime sector that, for Europe is a key element of the economy. 10% of the GDP is coming from a maritime sector. 90% of the goods are transported by maritime sector. Europe is has a leadership role in building cruise ships. And we have to maintain this leadership here in our continent. But to do that, as I said, we need really to make sure that all the vision that you were mentioning before can create and support, let's say, strength for our system and not, let's say, weaknesses to us.
Others. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great. We are right at our time. Thank you to our amazing panel. Thanks very much. Heavy and lots of complicated pieces to it. So thanks very much. Round of applause for them.